Hey guys, welcome back to another video. I hope you guys are having a wonderful start to your week, staying safe and staying rested. Take those rest breaks when you need them. Now, as I mentioned in my post yesterday, Mondays from now on will be dedicated to carrier capacity insights. Every single week, we'll take a look at what is going on with carriers in the market. How many carriers are entering the trucking industry? How many carriers have left the industry? And what is the net change in carrier population? If you're new to my channel, welcome. I teach about the trucking industry with a heavy focus on the spot market as well as freight market analysis. So if this is a topic that interests you, feel free to subscribe down below. So yes, carrier capacity. This is data that I get from the FMCSA. I filter it to narrow it down to only common carriers of property except for household goods. I put all the data in my tables. They create these beautiful charts we're going to be looking at, and that way we can analyze what is going on week to week and month to month with carrier capacity. All right, let's go ahead and look at some numbers. Ready? Let's go. All right, guys, first we're going to start with an overview of what is happening, and we're going to be looking at specific numbers. So this is for June 26th through June 30th, which is last week. And we're going to start with voluntary revocations. What is a voluntary revocation? Well, this is when the carrier decides that they no longer wish to operate, so they voluntarily give up their authority. Why can this happen? Well, there are several reasons, and everyone has their reason for giving up their authority, but one of the main ones is either losing money in the business or losing confidence in the industry or deciding that this industry is simply not worth it. So how many voluntary revocations happened last week? Well, 543 carriers decided that that's it. They're giving up their authority as of last week. Then we have the involuntary revocations here. This is when the FMCSA takes away someone's authority to operate. Now, why can this happen? Well, it can happen for a multitude of reasons. Most commonly, it has to do with compliance issues, right? One of the most common things that causes an involuntary revocation is if the carrier's insurance lapses. There are also different documents. If the carrier doesn't file certain documents, the FMCSA decides to revoke their authority. Or it can be something a little bit more sinister, like the FMCSA deems the carrier not safe to operate on the US road. So they take away their authority because of the safety score. Now, something that I do want to mention, and this goes more towards psychology. Those of you who have been watching my videos for a while, you know that I studied psychology in university, specifically abnormal psychology. But in terms of human psychology, voluntary revocations and involuntary revocations usually can be reinstated. And we'll talk about that in just a minute. We have it right here. But where psychology plays in is that voluntary revocations tend to stick more than involuntary ones. And this is pretty obvious, right? A carrier voluntarily deciding that they don't want to operate anymore is very different than a carrier losing their authority because of some paperwork issue. Who is more likely to reinstate their authority? So involuntary revocations, 1,668 carriers had their authorities revoked by the FMCSA last week. I know it looks like a very high number for a weekly 5-day timeline, but it's not. It's pretty much on par with all the previous weeks since I started tracking this data. So the total decrease in authorities, which is the voluntary revocations plus the involuntary ones, we had a loss of 2,211 carriers last week. Again, seems like a high number, but it's not. It's on par with prior weeks. Now let's take a look at what is happening with carriers who are entering the market, and we'll start with the reinstatements of authority. As you remember, I said that reinstatements happen when a carrier either voluntarily gives up their authority and then changes their mind and decides to reinstate it so they can operate, or a carrier loses their authority, the FMCSA takes it away, and they correct the situation and their authority gets reinstated. So as of last week, 622 carriers had their authorities reinstated. Now then we have new authorities here. What are new authorities? New authorities are carriers who already got their certificate of authority, meaning that they have all the documents, they're in complete compliance, and they are ready to hit the road. So in terms of new authorities, 1,371 carriers, common carriers of property except household goods, got their authority last week. Now, that means that the total increase in authority, which is reinstatements plus new authorities, it was 1,993 carriers last week. So if we take into consideration the decrease in authorities and the increase in authorities, we get the net change in carrier population. And last week, we lost a net of 218 carriers. Now, unfortunately, and this is going to sound horrible, but unfortunately, this is the second lowest weekly decrease since I started tracking this data in April of 2023. All right, now let's take a look at some charts based on the numbers. And what we have here, this is the weekly chart. As you can see, we have weeks here, week 14, which is the beginning of April, all the way to week 26, which is last week. So what we can see, number one, we have the red line, and this is the involuntary revocations week by week. Now, the last data point, which is right here, this is last week. And we can see that we had a peak in involuntary revocation. A ton of carriers relatively were losing their authorities compared to the prior weeks. But since then, last week, those revocations, involuntary revocations, did go down. The green line, this is new authorities. These are the carriers who just got their certificate to be able to hit the road and start making money. And we can see that those increased, but they're staying pretty much in line with prior weeks. In the past month, or a little bit more than a month, I would say, it has been kind of all over the place, but currently we're pretty much in line. But yeah, there was an increase in new carriers since the week before. Then we have the blue line right here. This is the voluntary revocations, meaning these are the carriers who voluntarily gave up their authority because they decided that they are no longer operating, it's just not worth it, or they're losing too much money or whatnot. We can see that for the past 3 weeks, the blue line, we have been relatively stable. It actually went down and then slightly went up as of last week. So voluntary revocations increased ever so slightly last week from the prior week, but still we're staying pretty stable, but we are at the lowest point week to week since I started tracking this data in April of 2023. Finally, we have the orange line, and the orange line is reinstatements of authority. Those carriers that lost their authority or gave up their authority and decided to reinstate it. So we can see there was an increase as of last week, and we're actually at the highest point week by week since the beginning of April. So yeah, it's interesting, and we'll get into what this could mean towards the end of the video. Then we have the black bars. The black bars show us the net change in carrier population week by week. And what we can see here is that we are, since the beginning of April, this is the second lowest decrease. The lowest decrease was during week 23. This is the second lowest decrease in carrier populations. And as we saw, it was, what was it, 218 carriers lost last week. Now let's take a look at the monthly chart. All right, this is the same chart, but now we're looking month to month. We have from April of 2023, when I started tracking it, all the way to June. First things first, we can see net carrier population, right? It's the lowest decrease in carriers since April. In May, we had a nice decrease in carrier populations, but June, not so much. All right, let's take a look. So first we have involuntary revocations. We had a peak in May. We had a ton of them in May. Many carriers were losing their authority because of something wrong. The FMCSA deemed that something was wrong. But now we're back to a little bit higher than April 2023 levels. Then we have new carriers, the green line, and we can see that I mean, it looks like we plateaued. We didn't. It's actually a very, very slight increase in new authorities. Not by much, but there is an increase. So more and more carriers are actually getting into the industry month over month. The involuntary revocations, they peaked in May, but they have decreased and they're at the lowest point since April. So less and less carriers are actually giving up their authority voluntarily. And reinstatements, they went up in April and they pretty much, they went up a little bit, but they pretty much stayed level more or less, which means that the reinstatements of authority, they are elevated compared to April, but they didn't change by much. So after looking at all those numbers, what are the conclusions we can draw? Well, to me, one thing is obvious. Considering that voluntary revocations are on the decline and reinstatements and new authorities are increasing, it seems to me that the carrier sentiment has changed. People are more hopeful about the market. Why would carrier sentiment increase? Well, because historically speaking, this is the time of year where things start improving, right? From produce season to back to school, then we have the holidays, and then we have the end of the year. Usually this is the time where volumes start increasing and so do rates. And I think many carriers are relying on this time of year to make some money. Sadly, this year is wonky and we are not seeing those volume increases and rate increases on the spot market. The good news is that carrier capacity still did decrease in June, despite the fact that the carrier sentiment seems to have improved regarding the freight market. But I guess we're going to see what's going to happen in July and August and September. Anyway, guys, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you learned something new. I am wishing you all a wonderful rest of your week, a happy 4th of July, and I'll see you in the next video.